We started the war. The United States started the war in 2011. We sent CIA agents, special operatives, and they went to coordinate and lead the efforts of the Al Qaeda linked terrorists who were attacking Syria at that time, attacking the legitimate government. They were sworn to behead all of the Christians, the Alawi, the Shia Muslims, but particularly with a focus on the Christians, killing them, uh, selling their daughters, their wives at slave markets. The United States became implacable allies. Just We have been unwavering supporters of Al Qaeda since then. Remarkably, this is the group that brought down the Twin Towers and the Pentagon on 9/11. And here, just 10 years after the national trauma of losing 3,000 people to the biggest terrorist attack in history, we were fully aligned and sending Central Intelligence Agency to lead Al Qaeda in an attempt to take over from the legitimate government of Syria. So, yes, I got very involved in it back in 2011, actually before the war began, because I was curious what were we doing in Libya, because we were overthrowing the government of Libya, which had been a close U.S. ally up to that point. And I realized that what we were doing is we were looting their tremendous stores of weapons and shipping them uh, over to Syria to supply the terrorists there. And that's what really got me involved because, I've shed blood for this country on the battlefield, and somehow the idea that we were allied with Al Qaeda was shocking. And I've studied it intensely since then, and have never found any suggestion to the contrary. To this very day, we support Al Qaeda, and we have gradually moved from the point where we recognize the that the people of Syria totally rejected all of the terrorists that we put forward. And eventually they rose up behind President Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian army, and they were able to force the hand of the terrorists and drive them from the country. And they would have completely purged Syria of the terrorists were it not for the fact that the U.S. Went in and physically put boots on the ground. You may recall President Obama perhaps 20, 30, 50 times saying we will have no boots on the ground. At the very moment that he was saying that, we were making the plans to put boots on the ground, and we now have a significant force that occupies northern Syria. There's no political legitimacy to it, but US and Turkish forces have occupied the northern part. This is the northern part of Syria is very special because it is the breadbasket for all of Syria. The vast bulk of the wheat produced to feed the Syrian nation is produced there. We deliberately have cut that off. Most of the oil and natural gas is also produced there. And we have, by occupying that area, we have seized the oil and natural gas, and we're giving it to U.S. companies and especially to groups that are using it to hold control. We have a Kurdish minority, and we use that minority as our allies to basically to rob the entire nation of its wheat and its fuel, and that's what we're doing. And even that was not sufficient to bring down the government. We've never shifted our objective, which is to bring down the government and to install an Islamic extremist uh, uh, government that will behead the Christians, the Alawites, the Shia, and the moderate Sunnis. That's our objective. And now uh, this this Caesar Civilian Protection Act has been introduced in the Congress and passed with very little debate or dissension. And the purpose of this is to create famine and destitution within Syria and to prevent them from rebuilding after 10 years of war that we have imposed on them. So right now we're creating famine, death, destruction. We have blockaded the Syrians from receiving medical supplies. I saw this back as early as 2016 when I visited hospitals there, and over they told me about the fact that they could not receive prosthetic devices for people injured by the landmines we've planted, and additionally they can't receive cancer medications. So for a woman who has breast cancer in Syria, she simply dies of it. And this is very treatable. States deliberately, intentionally prevents Syrian women from receiving breast cancer medication. And it is remarkable how cruel and savage U.S. policy is. And the members of Congress seem, so many of them, just totally oblivious. And they don't care and they don't understand. They don't know what they're doing. But they go in and they take away the ability of a country to use its own currency. They support naval blockades of countries that have never done anything to us. Never the first hostile act towards the United States. And then we create famine and starvation. We have small children starving. And
Well,
I think there's a larger intent. Um, it's my impression that there are a group of global oligarchs, people of fabulous wealth, people who can literally their personal wealth is more than the wealth of great nations. And these people, they gather together in places like Davos periodically to coordinate their efforts. It is my impression that the overall plan is to dissolve nation states, to create a state of chaos and disorder, not only overseas. We're doing this to nations overseas, but it's being done in this country also. The disorder that you see today in America, the tremendous attack on basic morality and decency, the unleashing of criminal elements all over the nation. You see this eating away at the foundations of America at the same time that the U.S. Armed Forces and the U.S. Foreign policy establishment is being employed to destroy and undermine other nations. But I think ultimately the goal down the line is to dissolve nation states and to create a singular government which will essentially be immune to public concerns. As government gets higher and higher, more distant from the people, then the people have less and less influence on what happens to it, direction. But keep in
Well,
mind, there are people who are becoming fabulously wealthy from all of this, and to them, they're looking at their bottom lines. These are very sadistic, selfish people who really take pleasure in creating starvation and war and death. I think if Americans understood what their government is doing, they would be aghast. I think one of the greatest difficulties of getting people to comprehend the gravity of what we are doing is that people, they've been raised to understand, oh, the U.S. is good, the U.S. does good things, and I think historically we've been a pretty good country overall. I've certainly shed my blood trying to make things better, I thought, but it's important for people to understand what sanctions do. Sanctions create starvation and hardship for common people. Uh, in northern Syria, and this is in the breadbasket of Syria, but all of the wheat is taken by these powerful warlords, the Kurdish warlords up there, and it's kept away from the people. Now, most of the people in northern Syria are Arab. They're Arabic. There are quite a few Christians also, but we have decided that everything goes to the Kurds or to U.S. companies up there. So it has gotten so bad that the famine that we have imposed is so great that even in the breadbasket of Syria, where they used to export wheat to other countries, it's gotten so bad that families are having to go to U.S. bases where the Americans throw their trash out in the dump, and they take their children, small children, and they wipe food from the cans that's left over from the garbage that Americans have thrown out. And so we now have reduced the once proud, highly intelligent, highly productive Syrian people to where now they're taking their children and they're going and they're having them root through American garbage so that they can feed themselves. Um, this is so tragic, and it sickens me that we put our American troops in this posture, because our American soldiers and Marines, they're patriotic, they're good people, they want to do good things, and we're forcing them to do the devil's work in Syria. We're forcing them to support Al Qaeda, in some cases ISIS, um, and uh, and it's just this bizarre situation where we're making them cause such hardship. We talk about the Nazis, we talk about the Bolsheviks, we talk about Mao Zedong with the mass starvation in China. We are doing this deliberately in Syria today. We are doing something. It may not be on the magnitude, because Syria is a small country, but considering the size of the country, yes, it is the equivalent of what was done in Nazi Germany, what was done during the Bolshevik Revolution. In modern day, we are deliberately causing starvation. We are deliberately causing the spread of disease. We are deliberately causing people to freeze to death in the winter in a country that used to actually be able to export a little bit of oil and natural gas. Not a lot, but they had a balanced economy. They shipped some agricultural products, they shipped oil, they had natural gas for export, they shipped a lot of machinery. They had a wonderfully balanced economy with a very productive people. We've wrecked their economy. We have we have helped the Turks to loot over 1,000 factories in Aleppo City. And now we have stolen their wheat and their fuel so that we can create starvation and famine. And there's a senior fellow from the UAE Finance Middle East Institute. They're very, very committed to overthrowing Syria. And this fellow forecasts growing destitution, famine, and predatory behavior resulting from the new Caesar sanctions. And he says he sees human suffering as an opportunity for the US to achieve regime change. So we can't convince the Syrians to accept a radical Islamic government that is devoted to beheading so many Syrian civilians. And so instead, because they won't accept this from us, we're saying, okay, let's create enough suffering, famine, starvation to where people will simply be forced to kneel before the US and comply with what we're trying to do. It is despicable. I am ashamed of what we are doing. It is not the America that I grew up in. I think it's time that Americans started to question, why are we being taught to hate so many people? China's not attacking us, Russia's not attacking us, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Venezuela's not attacking, Cuba's not attacking us. And yet we are taught, we teach our children almost from the time they're born to hate and despise these other people. Now there are things that I would change if I were a citizen of China or of Iran or wherever. But those are not my country. My country is the United States, and believe me, we've got problems enough of our own without going over and trying to dictate lifestyles to other nations. But people need to remind themselves. We have a generally Christian nation, and people might reflect on the fact that it was Jesus who said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be the children of God. When is the last time that the U.S. has spoken about peace? When is the last time we have ever said, let's end the wars? We don't talk about ending wars anymore. We talk about continuing them indefinitely. And I think it's time that we began to question, why are we taught to hate so many people in this country? We need to start looking at sanctions. Sanctions are sadistic. They're evil actions taken. We never could do the same thing that we do today because of the lack of computer technology. But today we can control the flow of information and so forth. We devalue countries' currency. The Syrian pound was doing okay, and now we have prohibited banks from exchanging Syrian pounds. So the Syrians cannot purchase repair parts for American-built machinery. They can't purchase medicine to heal cancer or heart disease or diabetes or things like that. And we prohibit the importation of food and fuel to Syria. We have imposed a naval blockade. We seize ships at sea with no authorization. The seizure of of a ship from another nation that you're not at war with is illegal under international law. And because it's illegal, if you don't have a declared war against the nation whose shipping you're seizing, then the seizure is an act of piracy. And the United States is actively engaging in piracy against oil ships that are sent by Iran and other countries to supply the Syrian nation. Americans need to start to challenge and question the whole idea of sanctions. It's become every time we have some little irritation with one country or another, something we dislike, we say, oh, let's get out there, let's sanction them, let's cause suffering. We are even talking about sanctioning Germany because it wants to complete the last 1% of a gas pipeline between Russia and Germany. Germany is one of our oldest and most staunch allies, and we're talking about punishing them because they trade as they are allowed to do with other countries. We're also threatening Australia, believe it or not. And I know we are telling Australia to shut down its coal industry because we've decided that in the United States, the governing elite is going to cut off all carbon fuels, and we're going to live on windmills and sun chips and corn alcohol in the gas tank. It's bizarre, and we have just become sort of a global dictator that we don't try to find common ground any longer with countries where we inevitably will have some disputes. Today, we simply have secretaries of state, and I think Mike Pompeo is a classic example. John Kerry was very bad. Pompeo got even worse. He was just a bombastic, selfish bully. He struck you less as a diplomat and more as the kind of schoolyard bully who would walk around with a gang of kids behind him, and he'd see a little boy with a crutch walking by himself on the playground, and he'd say, "Hey, watch this," and he'd run over and kick the crutch and throw the kid down on his face and laugh for the other kids. This guy is despicable. I can't believe that he prides himself on the fact that he has been able to create so much suffering. And I don't see things getting better under Tony Blinken. He's the one who has been threatening Australia with sanctions and saying, we're not going to have you making your own decisions on your national energy policy. We're going to make your policies in Washington. We are the worst ally that a nation could ever have, because we don't hesitate to threaten and bully all of the countries that are supposedly allied with us. It's a very strange thing, but Americans they've got to wake up to what these sanctions are. Every time that they impose a sanction, they say, we don't do this to cause suffering for ordinary people. It's targeted at the leadership. That is almost a standard operating procedure to make that statement. It is unequivocally false. The impact falls on the ordinary person who suddenly finds that the cash in their wallet is devalued, who finds that they don't have enough bread to feed the family, who finds that they have to go out to American trash dumps to wipe little bits of food from the cans that were thrown away by American soldiers just so that they can keep their children alive. This is not America, and Americans really need to come to grips with this casual implementation of sanctions. Sanctions are fundamentally cruel, evil actions, and there's simply no justification. If you're not in an active state of war with a nation, which I hope doesn't happen, but there is no legal justification for them, and there certainly is no moral justification. They are just the antithesis of Christianity. They're the antithesis of other religions, of Islam. They are incompatible with any notion of mercy and kindness and decency. So I think I would like to see our churches begin to question sanctions. What are we doing? Why are we so cruel towards other people? Thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate it very much.